Record to the cloud. Good morning, cloud.
Morning.
Thank you,
morning,
Ed.
Rabbi.
Good morning. Good morning to everyone, Harriet and
Morning.
everyone else. Yeah, Ed, your face just has printed on it. Hit the record button.
At least I'm accomplishing something.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. Well, I hope everyone's ready for Hanukkah. Got your candles and your menorah all set.
I don't know, Rabbi. I wrote a note to Steve and Rabbi Siegel that it's not a menorah, it's a Hanukkah,
That is correct.
and we need to educate the public.
That's a good example of you're absolutely technically 100% correct. On the
But
other hand, it is going a little, I think it's a little late.
it's a little late.
Not because it's
It's never
December,
too late.
not because
Educate.
it's the 24th. It's a little late because sometimes even when the popular culture gets it wrong, you're just stuck with it, right? I mean, I'm trying to think of another good example, but sometimes when the popular culture gets something wrong, it's so entrenched. But Ed, keep trying.
Menorah only has
Yes,
seven lights, seven candles,
that
so
is that is absolutely 100% correct.
now
But
the other term that might fly is a Hanukkah menorah.
Hanukkah, I've heard that used. Um, but again, most people don't realize that you need the qualifier because the noun is used for something else, for the obviously the one in the temple. But okay, popular popular usage, I think, has decided that debate, as sometimes happens. Okay, so we'll begin today. I'm hoping to do today, what I will do today is finish our discussion of transgender. We'll take a week off, and then we'll go back to we'll go to the Modern Responsive book by Rabbi Barmash. I'm looking at it on my shelf, and talk about whistleblowing, which is the next chapter. In her book, she has excerpts from the different responsa. I will use the original responsa. One, I feel I'm not engaging in any copyright issue by copying all the pages from her book. And two, they're easily available and I can send them to you. And it gives you some, she occasionally will edit out a paragraph or two or three from the original response. So I tell you, I feel more comfortable using the original. So that's where we'll go. And I think I sent that out. Didn't I send that out? The whistleblower responses. Yes, I did send that out. Okay, so let's go back. We were looking at
Rabbi,
different.
can I
Yes,
just
Rini.
interrupt for a second? I was listening to the Brian Lair show this morning on WNYC, and every year he gives out an award, well, for the past few years, for community service. And this year they're looking for groups. It's a specific topic. And this year they're looking for groups who have helped transgender youth.
Mhm.
And the comments he made when he introduced the topic were so interesting in terms of that there are some people, including the upcoming president, who says there are only two genders.
Right.
And he said, how would you feel if you were completely erased, completely ignored and erased? And it just fits in with what we've been reading
Right.
about
Well,
all the ways you can, accept people, not reject them.
exactly. No, that's that. Yes, that statement was made a few days ago. Imagine if, as let's face it, we used to live in countries in which the official policy was there's only one religion.
That's
Right?
right.
We know what that's like. Um, Frankly, there are people who are trying to reestablish that in the United States and talk about some southern states like
Definitely.
Texas or Oklahoma. Oklahoma is a bad example. But yes, you're right. That's a very serious question. I have some additional text which we may or may not be able to get to, but we'll see how far we get today. Okay, so I want to share the screen Wait a second. One more statement about from our movement, and then we'll look at a couple from Orthodoxy. And actually, there were letters to the editor. I don't know if any of you get the New York Times print edition. The letters to the editor today had some interesting material, which we, depending upon the time, we may or may not get to. This comes from, I don't know if this is in print anymore. The Women's League for Conservative Judaism, the national organization of all the sisterhoods, used to have a physical magazine. Am I correct that I don't think they have a physical magazine anymore? Like a lot of things, they don't exist, but they do have an online presence. And this was from January 2018, New Outlook for Women's League. So this is the official women's organization, the conservative movement. Actually, it was founded by Solomon Schechter's wife, whose first name escapes me at the moment. Anyway, so remember what Rabbi Barmash always tells us. When you read something, you want to know why are they starting where they're starting, and how do we know from where they're starting what it is that they're trying to prove or how they're going to prove something. And very interesting, in this article, what does she talk about? This is by Jane Rosen. And the article is Transgender Jews and Jewish Law, Redefining the Landscape. And what does she start with? She starts with an example. Joy Layden always knew she was a girl. She played with girls. She was consciously concealing her gender identity, even from parents. In the 1960s, remember the 1960s? Some of us were alive then. Were there transgender people then? Of course there were transgender people, but they hid themselves. That's that question. So, what do the traditional commentaries say about this? Well, people hid it then. Okay, so this person managed the secret, studying other boys to copy their behavior. Finally found the love he never thought possible in college with a woman. Married, had a family, promised to stay with him until 2007. And then this person decided to begin living her authentic self as Joy. She knew it would cost her marriage, disrupt the lives of her children, but she followed, she said, Moses' instruction to choose life. Today, Joy, not Jay, Joy Layden, the David and Ruth Gottesman Professor of English at Yeshiva University Stern College. Now, that actually surprised me. Yeshiva University is having some very great difficulties dealing with this issue. You may have noted in just the last year or two, there have been court cases about whether or not the university can use a student activity fund to support a gay student group. That has gone to the courts. I honestly don't know where it is, but that has been in the news because of the students who would like it and the administration who has been against it. But here it is, teaching at Yeshiva University. Married to another woman, she considers herself as transgender, whose sexual orientation is woman. Now, stop for a second. Why did this article begin with this? We know where she's going, right? She doesn't begin with, it says in the Bible, do this. It says in the Bible, do that. Nor she will go to the two teshuvot that we've looked at, Rabbi Rabinowitz and Rabbi Sharzer, but she starts with a real life example. And I assume the assumption she has is, let's not pretend this isn't happening. This is a real life example. And I want you to know that what we're talking about is not something made up, trendy, or some left-wing conspiracy. This is a real person with a real life. And I think that tells us a lot about where she's going, and also says something about conservative Judaism as well as to where she's going. And she points out, I didn't see Transparent on television, as some of you may know, there's a transgender person in that series, but then there was a scandal, and that whole series kind of has not as often discussed. President Trump's attempt to ban transgender individuals from the U.S. military, which is also what he said the other day. So the conservative movement has to have its say, but she starts with the example, and that's what's important, and that's what's important. And then in the article she brings, yes, we don't have to go over this there. That's Rabbi Meir Rabinowitz. We read his teshuvah, right, in which we remember that teshuvah basically said that the physical characteristics determine gender. And then there's Rabbi Sharzer, Dr. Rabbi Sharzer, whose teshuvah we read very carefully, and which he obviously has agreed. Gender that we as a society associate with a person is at least as good and arguably much better than assigning gender identities on the basis of autonomy or gender makeup or physical attributes. When a person makes a claim about his or her gender, we should accept that, contrary to Rabbi rabbinate, and we've seen that. And she talks about different examples, and she then looks at some very other real people. Now, you may remember Rabbi Micah Buck Yael was quoted in Rabbi Scherzer's Teshuvah. There's Rabbi Buck Yael. Not all transgender people require or intend to have surgery, which is, again, something that is mistakenly believed in many circles, said Rabbi Buck Yael. Okay. So ordained in 2014, the same year he came out as a man and a lesbian before his transition, Rabbi Buck Yael was among the first openly gay rabbis accepted into the Jewish Theological Seminary, my alma mater's rabbinical school. He and his wife were married 9 years ago in a same-sex Jewish ceremony within the conservative movement. Okay, so again, you can see the intention of the person who wrote this article, say, this is real life. This is what's going on in the world, okay? Okay, let's go down. And remember we said that part of the issue was that halacha is a binary system, male or female, pointed out that the sensitivity of Rabbi Sharzer shows to transgender Jews. He never asks, are transgender allowed to exist, which is what is being asked in the political system, and what do they have to do for Rabbinic Judaism to accept them? What do they have to do for Rabbinic Judaism to accept them? Remember, we looked at Rabbi Safran, the Orthodox rabbi, who basically said, well, what they have to do is accept the wisdom of live within the confines of Rabbinic Judaism and just say they're facing a really terrible challenge, right? Okay. What does halacha require? Okay. And they remember all those people who abstained from the teshuvah. So in this article, the author speaks to one of them. You may recall I asked Rabbi Elliot Torf about that, and this confirms what Rabbi Joshua Heller, who was a Atlanta rabbi on the committee, he abstained. I felt there were some gaps that still needed to be filled in the process that I would have wanted to see filled. You know, it's not just that they disagreed with it, but that they felt it was incomplete, which is exactly what Rabbi Dorf has said to me. What about cross-dressing? There is a path around the prohibition. One could argue that the commandment should be interpreted so that someone who identifies as a particular gender should dress in a manner appropriate to the gender, okay? On the other hand, that line of reasoning still forbids someone who identifies as a cisgender male to cross-dress in female garments and vice versa. And he's saying that there are some things that were left out. And then he asks a very interesting question. Are we promoting tolerance or true acceptance? It's a very important distinction. Tolerance. Okay, you're there. We're okay that you're there. We'll tolerate it. As opposed to say, you're there and everything, we accept you into the community. It's not we're just tolerating who you are, but we're saying that you're accepting. He didn't like Rabbi Sharzer's definition of transgender. It's not for me to tell someone what is or isn't their gender, but I need to understand the parameters of that. At what point is someone considered to be transgender? If we're saying that we waive a particular commandment because the person is not able to observe it, then we need a better definition of what is transgender. How does one define the point of transition? What's the counter argument that we've seen to Rabbi Heller is that sometimes there is not a point. It is a gradient that a person has. Yes, there is some point, but when you're on the gradient to transitioning, yes, that is something that is difficult. While Rabbi Sharzer's answer is self-declaration, I feel we wanted more, even if the answer is not surgery. Okay, we understand where he's coming from. And then, of course, there's Elliot Dorff. Some you may recognize him. The theoretical problem is much greater than the practical one. He points out on the ground what's happening. Many arms of the movement, as well as individual congregations, will deal with creating policies and accommodations that best serve their constituencies. And so he goes down to one of the great creations of our movement, Camp Ramah. What about Camp Ramah? What happens when you have teenagers, right? Camp Ramah goes through, the campers are through high school, and the staff members are mostly college students and older, right? What do you do at Camp Ramah? Balancing the privacy of campers who are transitioning with sensitivity to the needs of other campers, which requires honest communication. In one case, a 13-year-old boy who had spent previous summer camp as a girl was known by the entire age group. The camp director felt it was important to send an email to the group's families prior to the start of the camp season. So in other words, openness. Let's say to the family, say, this is what's happening with this camper. And she concludes, Jewish culture is fully open to interpretation, yet there will remain those who feel that certain rules don't apply to Jews living outside of the conventional gender boundaries. One might reason that conservative Judaism has no need to change or adapt. It upholds the same inclusive community-based traditions, and those terms have nothing to do with an individual's gender identity. Okay, you could say, we don't have to do anything, we're all, but transgender or non-binary individuals with gender may not find a place of acceptance easily. Certainly that was true in the past. And what we're saying is that that's changing. And I think Rabbi Dorff is correct. It's probably changing more on the ground than necessarily theoretically. But whether it is finding oneself a Jewish camp or serving a leadership role in the clergy, a place within conservative Judaism world is indeed possible. Okay. Comments or questions on this article? A very, I think, clear statement on conservative Judaism. I want to take a look at one other article. We talked about Orthodoxy. I want to take a look at one article from the Orthodox world. Okay, everyone have that? Okay. This is from the Jewish Journal, which is an Orthodox publication, published. Obviously around 2016 was really when we saw a number of these articles, and this really came up. And it was an evening on February 10th on transgender issues, given by one of the top leaders of the modern Orthodox movement. Not Rabbi Safran. Rabbi Safran we saw before. Avi Safran is the more right-wing. This is more modern Orthodoxy. Okay, attracted 100 people to the modern Orthodox Beth Jacob congregation where in Beverly Hills, which automatically says to you this is probably a more liberal place than many Orthodox congregation. Okay. Talmudic references. While transgender people are diverse in how they present their gender and their transition process, many do not undergo sex reassignment surgery, which again is a misconception. Much of the rabbi's talk focused on physical changes, such as surgery and hormonal treatments. And this is what he said. A person who is a committed Jew but wants to live in contemporary society has to walk a fine line. Jewish tradition is categorically denying the possibility of modifying one's body through clothing, makeup, hormones, or surgery to transition. Yet, during other moments, explained exceptions under Jewish law where a person could legally change body and name to match gender identity. In this talk, he continually returned to these three instructions. And so what is he going to say? Nobody should reject a Jew from a religious congregation because he or she is transgender. That's very okay. Encourage compassion for transgender people, saying that transgender, again, he's trying to make it sound like we want to accept transgender Jews in a community, very sincere in their desire to worship the Almighty and observe the Torah. should be encouraged to remain within the fold of observant Judaism. There are guidelines in our religion for how to disagree. Hatred is not okay. Okay. The issue of surgery or transgender, yet there are exceptions. If my life is in danger, I can do all of the above. The surgery, cross-dressing. For example, if a person is suffering from gender dysphoria, is that person's life is in danger? If, as a result, the person is suicidal, the rabbi said, then his or her life is in danger, making it permissible to transition to the other gender. Notice that he says, well, what if they're not suicidal? What if they're just depressed? Well, what if they're very emotionally disturbed but not suicidal? What he's saying is that in order for him to allow for the changes in Jewish law, it would have to unquestionably be an issue of pikuach nefesh, of a life in danger. And he pointed out most rabbis believe birth gender is the halachic gender for life, which is the traditional Orthodox position. And he's quoting from another source. The current appearance of a transsexual does have some bearing in social interactional situations. Suggests that in Orthodox synagogues where the genders sit separately, which side of the mechitza should a transgender person sit on? A transgender male should sit in the men's section. Wow. And the transgender female should sit in the women's section. So he's basically saying that is not birth gender identity that is determinative. Similarly, for someone who is shomer negia, someone that should not have any physical contact between men and women, concerned about touch, Weintraub said a transgender person should be treated based upon how they present their gender, not the gender they were assigned at birth. This is a very liberal view in Orthodoxy, but it's interesting that he is making accommodations for transgender people. The transsexual, first and foremost, a human being who must be treated with dignity, respect, and sensitivity. I hear what he's saying. What is the reality on the ground? I don't know what's going on. Would a transgender person, let's say there's a transgender person who was known in one gender at an Orthodox synagogue and then transition to another gender, would that person, I suppose in certain synagogues they would be accepted, but I'm sure that there would be places where they would not be. Okay. Comments or questions? Share. One other brief article about Orthodoxy. Here. Oops, stop the share your screen. Okay, stop the share. Okay, share screen. That one. Got it. Okay. Got the new article? Okay. Orthodox rabbis wrestle with Jewish law and transgender issues. Right. Here's the riddle. This is from the Jewish Telegraphic, the JTA, the Jewish press group that sends out writes articles and sends them out to Jewish papers around the country. If a transgender Jew shows up at an Orthodox synagogue, which side of the mechitza? What's interesting is we see there is one Orthodox rabbi who says it's what they present at the moment, right? What about a woman who transitions to male? Does she put on tefillin? There are real questions. So, here it is. Though most but not all Orthodox authorities who have considered the issue say that hallmarks of transgender identity, cross-dressing, hormonal treatment, sex reassignment surgery are forbidden, but still, if someone has already altered their anatomy, what gender? In other words, I think we've seen that transgender Jews often don't even ask their rabbis. They sort of present themselves afterwards. There is no shortage of Orthodox Jews who want to talk about this. Most people who are trans probably won't feel comfortable remaining in the Orthodox community, said Rabbi Mark Drach, Executive Vice President of the RCA, the nation's main centrist Orthodox association. On the other hand, for those who want to stay Orthodox, there are challenges for creating a safe space in a community where there's lots of misunderstanding, prejudice, and concerns about halakhic implications. Excuse me. Second. Achoo. Achoo. Achoo.
Extra.
Okay.
Bless you.
Sorry. Okay. It's been 8 years and nobody's made a public fuss, says a person. This is Dana Friedman, an Orthodox trans Jew. Grew up Orthodox, an information technology consultant who dabbles in Orthodox tranny stand-up comedy. It's a very small genre, as you can imagine. Nobody has asked me to leave any place, and I have not heard that anyone has a real problem with me being in the women's section. So that, I think what we're seeing is that within Orthodoxy, there's a beginning to say that there are, pikuach nefesh, saving human life, should supersede. We've seen that. The quandary of how Orthodox communities should relate to people who have contravened Jewish law is not unique. Generations ago, Orthodox rabbis debated how to treat Jews known to violate Shabbat or kosher laws, and whether they should be counted in a minyan. And by the way, the answer was that they could. More recently, Orthodox communities have been grappling how to treat openly gay individuals. Trans Jews should be treated just as sympathetically, said Rabbi Asher Lopatin. That's a very liberal view, the open Orthodox rabbi. So that you can see that within the Orthodox movement, there are differences of people. We saw Rabbi Safran last week who said that they did not feel that they should have a place in the Orthodox community.
That's my nephew.
Who is?
Jeffrey Fox.
Oh, Jeffrey Fox is your nephew. Okay. And he is among the more liberal Orthodox, correct? You probably
yes, he can accept me.
Well, I'm so glad to hear that.
Transgender, but just in general.
In general. No, in general, the groups that he is part of are the types of groups that have, they have a mechitza in the synagogue, but I think I've mentioned it runs down the middle of the floor, right? The women are on one side, the men on the other side. The women aren't in the balcony or behind the curtain or away from the main service. Okay. Now, I did mention last week, and did I not open the, oops. Oh, here it is. Okay. I did find this other article, and I am on the email list for many hospitals and many medical practices because I see many doctors in medical practices. And they have fascinating articles about all sorts of topics. As a matter of fact, I just read one on what do you do if you have a tendency to get the upper respiratory infections, as I do. But this appeared on the email articles from Mount Sinai Medical Center. And I think and I mentioned this last week, and even though it's not directly a person who is an expert on Jewish law or ethics, I think it's important I found it to be a very important article because trans rights were a hot button election issue. We asked the doctor to separate fact from fiction. And I would argue that it's important that when we discuss and think about some of the ethical issues, we're at least basing ourselves on facts. So that's why I brought this. Okay, so we'll spend a little time on that, and if we have more time, there were some letters to the editor of the New York Times today that also bear upon this. All right, any comments or questions so far? Excuse me. Okay. So this is talked with Joshua Safer, MD. I assume these are, I don't know what those abbreviations stand for. Executive Director of the Mount Sinai Center for Transgender Medicine and Surgery. Okay, so this is a doctor with experience at one of the major medical centers in our country. Okay. what is gender affirming care? Now, some people think that gender affirming care, and it's been parodied in many ways. People think it refers to one protocol, but it means medical care for transgender and gender diverse people. And it's individualized, right? Young adults and others, right? Typically, the first things people look for are hormones, and we have various hormone regimes. Okay, we know about, he's going to say a little bit more about hormones, and it's important for us to know about that. We also consider the impact on fertility, which is a question that is often raised. And we've done what we can to preserve fertility, even for people there that doesn't seem likely to be a priority. Remember that they're really concerned about fertility. Well, if we have time, we'll see the other articles. The usual situation is that people start with hormones and see how that goes before they consider surgical interventions. Those aren't absolutely necessary. When someone is looking for a gender-affirming surgery, usually we're dealing with someone who's very established, aware of their gender identity, had ample opportunity to think it through, has been on hormones for a significant period of time, in contact with the medical establishments. Then, in other words, some of the political people say that that's 1, 2, 3. No, this is a long-term process. For genital reconstructive surgery, they consider mental health, medical conditions, plans for recovery, ability to engage within the system. We do assessments in a holistic way on making sure that the patients have the best experience, don't have a mental health concern that we haven't optimized, and don't have a medical concern we haven't optimized. Okay. What are puberty blockers? I mean, this is argued all the time. Well, what are they? Tell you the truth, I didn't really know. When people say puberty blockers, they mean what we medical folks called GnRH agonists. They're a medication that half a century ago were developed with the thought that they would help with fertility. It was accidentally observed that when you get a big shot, they actually shut your reproductive system down for a period. And so they're not really puberty blockers as much as they are puberty pauses or sex hormone pathway pauses. Many years ago, we started using them for people who enter puberty earlier than we think is socially appropriate something called precocious puberty, right? We simply pause puberty for typically a year or two until a young person is more in line with their peers. Okay, that's the original use of them. That's the regimen we use for transgender kids with a similar thought process. We use them for transgender kids who are already beginning physical puberty while we're still talking about what to do and need to hold on to things while we're making plans. So that's what we're talking about. And again, in the popular mind, it is made to seem as if they're 1, 2, 3, and they change everything. Okay. Whether a minor can receive gender-affirming surgery or puberty blockers without parental consent. You've heard this. They go to school one and it comes to the back. Right. It is hard to envision how a minor could have surgery without parental consent. That's a general statement. I don't think states allow that. And I don't know of any medical institution that would do that. And I can't think of a situation where that would be otherwise. So that's a no. Okay. Kids can't get surgery at any level without their parents. In New York, you can't even get medicines without your parents' consent. Gender-affirming care is part of mainstream medicine, right? We've recently seen the claim that someone can obtain surgery during the school day. Can you speak on that? Let me just talk about what really happens to a teenager. A teenager wants to have gender-affirming intervention. That teenager is going to come in with the custodial parents. Again, my own institution is very conservative in this space and even more conservative with kids. The so-called puberty blockers are actually a very conservative intervention to allow us time. So the whole process wouldn't occur in a single day, an extended period of time. And if we're talking about a surgery for someone under the age of 18, we're usually talking about chest masculization, breast tissue removal, surgery for older teens. That really is the only thing that's out there. And that would only be done on someone who has been in care for a very long time and is on hormones. And again, everybody, including the family and the medical experts, is on board. That's not what you're hearing in the politics. If I'm going to speculate about fears people might have, it's that things will happen to their children secretly without them being aware. And the short of it is that's not how the medical establishment works. We don't give medication without the parents knowing and supporting it. I'm a parent. I totally understand that fear. But we don't do surgeries without the parents knowing and supporting them for anything across all healthcare. That's just not a thing. We don't do that. Okay. Suggested that body parts being chopped off. Can you tell us what the actual process is of dealing with children who may have gender identity issues? The reality is that when we say children, some think of little children before puberty. At that stage, we don't have medical interventions at all. For prepubescent kids, it's all talk therapy and advice. As kids do hit puberty, even through hormones, in a perfect world, might be something we would consider. We're very conservative, and that's the whole point of puberty blockers. Surgery is almost entirely an adult thing with incredibly rare exceptions. I think that's pretty clear. Schools overstepping their roles. I can only speak as a doctor. I think it's important to be clear that the general rule across the United States is that we don't give medications to people under the age of 18 without permission from their parents and guardians. So, I mean, this they go to school and the parents don't know what's going on is, of course, not that. Okay. What about failing to provide support for transgender teens? Okay. If we deny people medical treatment, then that's a source of stress and mental health harm. We have statistics of people who've had access to care who've really been in the very unfortunate situations from a mental health perspective. I don't know if that would be different from if we denied anyone their medical care. It's not so much that they have a medical health issue that we're alleviating, it's that we're treating them appropriate. It talks about mental health issues. If a person has anything that might be made worse by going through major surgery, then we want to protect them. Okay. Have you been privy to anyone who has falsely or incorrectly identified as transgender? That's a reasonable question. What about people? Do people make a mistake about this? Honestly, it's not common. But I have seen people who have mental health issues not understanding their gender identity. And they come seeking gender-affirming hormones, but they're wrong. In short, it's very, very rare and usually pretty obvious. But I, of course, involve my much more expert mental health colleagues when we have any suspicion of that sort. Here's something that you also hear about. Is it how common it for a person to detransition, to go back to their previous gender? It's not common for people to stop taking treatment. The terminology is all over the place because for some, detransition has a certain negative sound. But most people, per surveys that I've seen, who stop taking their treatment do so because of social pressure, not because they're changing their viewpoint. They weren't being treated well in society, things like that. Some people do change their viewpoint, but in my career, I can count maybe 2 or 3 patients. It's really infrequent. I have one person who just decided to stop treatment with no regrets. They'd been doing it for years and decided not to do it anymore. So that it does definitely exist, but it's very rare. What about young people regretting actual surgeries? Not so much from young people. It's more of a question of whether people regret anything they do. I had a patient, not a young person, who had difficulty with how they were being treated and decided to change back. And I'm sure if you ask them, do you regret having the surgery? They might say yes, because the whole thing ended up not working out. Not that they weren't transgender, but society was hostile and they couldn't get around it. We and some other large academic centers are following specific groups of our patients. So far, we're having a very hard time finding any significant numbers of people who regret transitioning. I mean, people you see interviewed in the media didn't get made up. Yeah, you sometimes see that. there are people who had a bad experience. And I think it's on us in the field to think about things that we could have done differently that would have helped them. There might be other places, medical places where they don't do it as carefully. How many people, right? How large a group are we talking about? The laws about gender surgery. What I know so far is that between 0.5% and 1% of the population says they're transgender. Between 1/2 and 1. Some surveys suggest that maybe half the people who say they're transgender are looking for medical interventions. That's between 1/4 and 1/2 of the population. And maybe half of them are looking for surgeries of any sort. 1/8 to 1/4 of the population. And it's a bit of a moving target. As we create a safer environment, more people are coming to us. Yeah, okay. So the people in our clinics is growing, although it still hasn't reached that full 0.5%. I see other surveys who ask kids about gender identity, and more of them report being gender diverse than they used to. I don't know what we'll actually see in terms of percentages shifting over time. People wonder, is a high percentage of my kids' class going to be trans? And my answer is that I don't expect that we're going to see more people coming for medical interventions, even if kids define themselves more broadly. And this concern about transgender non-conforming is trendy. Being transgender means there's a lack of alignment between the biology of your brain that tells you what sex you are, what we call medical professionals mean the gender identity, and at least some of your other biology. That said, we depend on people reporting to us that they are transgender. There's no blood test or scan. To be conservative, we look to people who are durable in their understanding of their gender identity and consistent in their reporting over time. Even if there's broadening in society in how people label themselves, that shouldn't change who requires medical treatment. Okay. Now I brought that again. It tries to speak very directly to some of the myths that we have seen promoted in the media. Yes, Rini.
You have to think that people are really pretty stupid if they think that they can send their little girl to school in the morning and she comes home a boy in the evening. And I don't understand how people could even buy into that. I mean, that's just
well, the whole issue of
nonsense.
transgender, we could say, appeals to people whose mindset sees the world in very binary terms. If there's a difference between saying, okay, you have a different mindset of how you see the world. That's the way things are. But then to be using that, as you point out, in a political way and saying things that simply aren't true to appeal to their worst fears is something different from saying, okay, tell me how you see the world, and I'll explain why I see the world differently, and we can talk about it, and we don't have to play on each other's fears.
But people actually buy into that because it's just confirming their fears. But if you even think about it for 2 minutes, you realize that can't possibly happen. So this whole subject is so people really need to be educated, and that's why this article is so excellent. But the people who really need to read it don't read it.
Well, again, it's not just a question of education, but I think it's also a question of our understanding of how different people see the world, and recognize that, again, that article from the Women's League for Conservative Judaism, she began with a very real example, right? She didn't begin by talking about the halakha or the biblical texts. So the question is, some of us in the political world believe that a rational discussion will change someone's mind. That's not always true.
That's true.
Let's not pretend otherwise. And there is, again, a very set view of how the world works, hierarchical, with hierarchies, with clear, and the part of all our minds say, yeah, there are distinctions between right and wrong and good and evil. There are parts of the minds, but in this case, there are minds that see the world that extends over to gender identity as well. And yes, the fears were very well played upon in our last political campaigns. Yes. Any other comments on this so far? We have a few minutes, and I just want to, I did this literally this morning, so I haven't had a long time to look at it. There was an article in the Times by well, that's the edit. No, that's not the one I wanted. Where is it? Oh yeah, here we go. Oh no, I forgot to
The
stop.
op-ed page, Rabbi?
Yeah, well, it was in the op-ed page on December 9th, and then today there were letters to the editor. The David French article. Here we go. Here. David French lives in Franklin, Tennessee, not far from where I used to live. And I have to tell you, he is a very strong believing Christian. Just to give you his background, he did go to a very right-wing evangelical church, which he stopped going to because he felt that there was a certain level, a terrible level of intolerance in that particular church. He's a very much of a believing Christian. And he is, as I've said many times, it's important for us to read people who we don't always agree with. Although I have to say that David French is someone that I very frequently agree with. He's a moral, reasonable person. But what happened in Tennessee, the Tennessee treatment care is about age, not sex. Now, the point he's going to be making in this article, I don't even, equal justice. Oh, I see. Equal justice under law. I think that's the Supreme Court building. That's not a building in Tennessee, as I recall. There he is. And this is dated December 8th. I'm sorry. So I said the 9th. It's dated the 8th. I didn't send this one out. I just literally did this a few minutes before class began. And his point is that there's a law in Tennessee that was passed. As you may know, in many southern states, the state legislatures has been gerrymandered to the point where there's an absolute Republican majority, and certain things are passed. In this case, the Tennessee state legislature passed a law that transgender care is prohibited for minors, any sort of transgender care, puberty blockers, as well as any type of surgery. And his point is that, I cannot imagine begin to imagine the pain of feeling that your body does not match your gender. I cannot imagine the pain of parenting a child. Okay. But here's where he is saying we should not, however, require states to permit treatments of dubious effectiveness, especially when those treatments carry risks of serious side effect. But that's exactly what the plaintiffs are requesting. In other words, his argument, and we just saw the previous article. Yes, in the previous article, they did say about issues of fertility, right? And that needs to be clearly thought out. But he's calling them dubious effectiveness, risks of serious side effects. So his argument is going to be that even puberty blockers have risks. I think if we looked at that article from Mount Sinai doctor, I think he acknowledged the risks and said that these things would have to be discussed. Okay, challenges Tennessee's ban on medical procedures that permit a minor to identify or live as a purported identity inconsistent with the minor's sex. This ban includes puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. It does not apply to adults. So what the doctor was talking about previously from Mount Sinai, some of the procedures that he mentions, which were I think it was very clear that he does that very carefully in full discussion over time with parents and child. This law would prevent all of that from happening, would close it down. And I really took a look at this somewhat quickly. It's deeply unfortunate that the public debate over gender care has been tainted by extreme intolerance. Yeah, that's the problem. This issue is not, are we talking doctors or are we talking about people with tolerance? Researchers are all frightened to present results at odds with the desires and goals of at least some activists. A scientific consensus achieved through threats and intimidation. I don't think there's I think the issue is that, and has been pointed out, because there isn't research funding for this, it's true, we don't have as much solid information as we would like to have. It would be a sad irony if the Supreme Court diminished the state's ability to protect young people from potentially harmful medical treatments at the very moment when the efficacy of those treatments are subject to an increasing amount of doubt. I think it's a selective reading of the medical literature. I think what we just saw from the other doctor was not the situation.
Rabbi, in a part that you didn't read, there was a little paragraph. He said the parents should have the absolute authority over what happens to their children, except in some cases. So he's saying parents should take care of children, but actually we know better than they do. The state knows better than they do, which
that's what they're saying.
yeah.
What's interesting here is that this is a conservative argument that the states know better than the parents. While in the conservative world, you frequently hear that the parents know better than the state. Right? It's an irony here when it comes to what kids read in their classrooms, as opposed to the medical treatment. So, which is what's the principle? Parents or the state? Right? So we see that. So on the few minutes we have left, I just point out there were some letters to the editor today. So I had a very quick look at this morning. When I saw that, I just found them. So if you do get the Times in print or online, you can go to the letters to the editor, December 23rd. Oh, it's dated. Well, they came in yesterday. They took the same artwork. And there are several articles, three letters to the editor. As a trans woman in her late 30s who could not begin transition until my 20s, I wish every day that I had been able to do so before puberty. The amount of pain, energy, and money I have had to spend to undo the effects of puberty, both to be comfortable in my body and to pass as a cisgender woman, is demoralizing, right? I was able to leverage my considerable education into a decent paying job, save money, and so on. But she points out children should have not to suffer through a similar struggle. To leave these weighted decisions to legislators instead of parents, their children, and the medical community is dooming youngsters at their best, hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical expenses in an effort to achieve a normal life. At worst, they will struggle with unemployment, homelessness, suicide, and death by their own hands. I understand the fears people have. Well, what if a child undergoes some type of intervention and regrets it later? But in reality, the overwhelming majority of trans people who receive gender-affirming care, including minors, do better. Well, we just saw that by the doctor saying that. Very few regret transitioning. I certainly don't. And, okay, oops. Forgot to take that out. Forgot to take certain things out. Let's not fool ourselves as to what this law is really about. It's a crusade against a minority group and the height of hypocrisy. Yeah, so much energy has been devoted to this crusade against my community under the guise of protecting minors. What about the danger of mass shootings in schools, poverty, child abuse, hunger, and homelessness from the social meter, from obesity? In other words, why has this become such a, because it is such an important part of the mindset of people whose votes politicians want. I mean, I cynically will say that it is. Two other quick letters. We have enough time, perhaps. This was, I thought, was cute. Consider an analogy. A state outlaws circumcision for infants and children, but not for adults, arguing that its intention is not to interfere with a religious right practiced by Muslims and Jews, but to protect the youths incapable of giving consent from the potentially adverse physical and psychological consequences of the procedure. Hey, an 8-day-old, what is he, right? To use a variation of Mr. French's formalization, the law is about age, not religion. Adult Jewish and Muslim men who wish to be circumcision may choose to undergo the procedure. Thus, their freedom to practice their religion is not affected. Would Mr. French himself find such a law defensible? Imagine. And by the way, there are parts of the world where they are trying to outlaw circumcision. This is a professor of politics at York University. And finally, critical medical decisions are being made by ill-equipped and extraneous parties. Whether an insurance company is determined what medical care will be covered, oh, here we that brings something else in. Or governments are debating who should get care. The bottom line is that both entities are no substitute for highly trained doctors who consult directly with patients. These decisions are medical, full stop. That is why we turn to doctors and do not march into the offices of our legislators or insurance providers for guidance. We trust the guidance of professional organizations, the AMA, the American Psychological Association, and Endocrine Society. Neither Mr. French nor Dr. Young, he's somebody that was quoted, could have highlighted any more clearly the interference with medical care by entities with ulterior motives. Families like mine want the government out of the exam room. I thought was very nicely stated. Okay, give us about 2 or 3 minutes. All right, our unit is over. Any comments about the whole unit that we just had on transgender?
It was very interesting, and also it was nice to know that there's some flexibility in our religion, which, you know, I love being Jewish, so every time you give a class, I love it more.
Well, thank you. Okay. I found it very informative. Boy, let me say this. I learned a lot over the last month that I did not literally know, both on Jewish law, halacha, and ethics, and also medically. I feel much more informed about the topic. Any other comments? Jack, did you have your hand up? Yes, no? I thought no. Okay. Anyone else have any comments or questions? Okay, well, in that case, let's just say that we all have a happy Hanukkah. I hope you're able to celebrate with friends and family. Chag Orim Sameach. Hey, where's Ed? Ed, remember, it's not, is it Chag Sameach or Chag Orim Sameach? Technically, Hanukkah is not a Chag. Chag technically only refers to the 3 pilgrimage festivals, Sukkot, Passover, and Shavuot. So actually, Chag Sameach doesn't fit entirely into our discussion. Ed, you follow that?
Yes, and empirically, I never did call Hanukkah a Chag.
Okay, but did you wish anyone a Chag Sameach during Hanukkah?
No.
Okay, good for you.
In English, then I'll just say Happy Hanukkah to you all.
Well,
Happy
Chag
New Year.
Urim, the Festival of Lights. Happy. Carol, you going to comment?
Books of Hanukkah are part of the Apocrypha. So what do we say for Hanukkah?
Right, Hanukkah, as Carol points out, this is something that people don't know. You know, ask your friends. What book of the Hebrew Bible is the story of the Maccabees? And what's the answer to that?
Nowhere.
It's not in the Bible.
Not in the
However, by the way, it's in the Catholic Bible. It's not in the Protestant, but the Catholics put it in. There are 2 books, the books of the Maccabees. And there are various reasons that the rabbis say, well, you know, we're living under the Romans. Do we really want to canonize a book that talks about armed rebellion against our oppressors? Or the Maccabees, they became both kings and priests. Now, not supposed to do that. 2 separate things, you know, separation of power. So the rabbis of ancient times put the books of the Maccabees out. So what would be the appropriate thing to say? Again, I've used Chag Orim Sameach, which also may not be perfectly appropriate because I'm using the word Chag. So you could Google, I'll bet you could Google that, but I've said Chag Urim Sameach, have a happy festival of light. Urim, or is light. So
Same to you. And Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to
happy
everybody.
secular New
Secular
Year.
New
That's
Year.
right. We do not say Shana Tova. No, that's
No,
what we
no.
say.
Happy secular New Year.
So
Rabbi,
have a good week, a happy new year. Hopefully I'll see some of you at the synagogue when we celebrate Hanukkah with Chinese food at the synagogue of how else. And we'll see you in 2 weeks, and enjoy. Thank you all.
Rabbi,
You.
Yes.
Bye.
I haven't been receiving your texts.
You haven't been receiving the emails about the classes?
About the text that you send out.
Oh, the the text. Okay, let me double check that, Ed. Thank you. I will double check that. Okay.
Yeah.
Take care.